Today I'm bringing you what I call the Ice Mage build. I've been doing builds like this all episode, one for each subclass, and they are focused on mastering every verb of a subclass. And for Stasis, that's using Rime-coat Raiments. We already have great access to freeze, but we're getting even more slow, and we get crystal shatter, so we can have shatters constantly in this build. We're using Rime-coat Raiments, which gives us an even stronger Bleak Watcher, with a Bleak Domain under it and Stasis crystals around it. Those crystals with the weapon perk Rime-stealer let us get infinite frost armor, and with our subclass setup, we can have infinite grenades constantly, and we require no kills to get them. All we have to do is shoot our crystals, and we can have our grenade up all the time. You can see here we are just flying through this Legend campaign mission. We're 15 power level under. We're using Stasis. It doesn't have access to a lot of healing. That is the weakest point of it, but we do have access to 50% damage resistance thanks to frost armor, which is keeping us survivable even though we're fighting large crowds of enemies. You can see here too, the freeze is just absolutely clearing groups of enemies. It's really, really great. It got buffed in Revenant, and those buffs are permanent. It wasn't just artifact perks. They made it good, so it's still hanging really strong. Stasis is still very good, and that's one of the main things I want to drive home here. The biggest thing about this build is being slow and methodical and strategic. You don't want to just run in or throw your turret wherever. You want to think about it and really make sure that it is where you want to be, and you're thinking about where the enemies are going to be and how to attack them. It's very strategic, but I think it's a really fun playstyle, and it's a good mix-up compared to some of the other builds that are a little bit more active and a little bit more aggressive. This is really good for challenging content, and it's always going to be strong for that. See here, with our turrets and Icebreaker, we're going to whittle down this boss and take him out. With that, let's get into it. I'm Engineer. I like to summarize the build first. Our goal with this is constant crowd control, AoE ad clear, and damage resistance up at all times. Generally, the use for this is probably going to be best in nightfalls or seasonal activities. It would also be the king of any onslaught type activity because it's about locking down an area and controlling it, and it's just really good for that. Not necessarily good in dungeon or raid encounters. It's not the best for boss damage, so it's not going to be great for that. But if you're having encounters with a lot of ads, it might help lock them down, so do consider it for that. Now, one thing I want to add here is question I hear a lot with this is, why aren't you doing this on Prismatic? I honestly think Stasis is better. You get higher frost armor uptime, and you can get grenade regen without ads. If you use Prismatic, Devour is great, but you have to get kills, and if you stop getting kills, it falls apart really quickly. So I think this offers a lot of good options, and it can also benefit you. You just have to think about healing a little bit. I've tested this up in Grandmaster activities before. There are a lot of Grandmaster builds with this last episode. You won't see as much Stasis Surge support this episode because Stasis just isn't focused, but it's still very strong and has always been effective for Grandmasters. For the pros, fantastic crowd control. Very good AoE ad clear the freezes, and the chaining of freezes with Iceflare Bolts is very good. It's very high uptime, doesn't rely on kills, and frequent 50% damage reduction thanks to frost armor. On the con side, very little healing. Darkness subclasses just be like that, but we do have Rift, and that can be okay. Teammates can mess with your loop. If they start shooting your crystals, it will really mess things up pretty badly, so keep that in mind. And boss damage is a little bit low. But if you use a good weapon setup, you can still churn out some pretty respectable damage. It's just not going to be great for short windows. First off, let's talk about the exotic Rime-coat Raiments. This was added in episode Revenant. It requires owning the final shape though, and you can get it from Rahul's Novel Decryption after you've reset his reputation once within a season or episode. And this does a lot of stuff. It's focused on improving the Bleak Watcher aspect on either Stasis or Prismatic. So the first thing it does, it's going to make the targeting range much larger. It's going to take that turret and raise it up a little bit so it can see more enemies and it won't be kind of in your face. It's going to create 4 crystals around it, and I've made a really fancy diagram here showing you what it looks like from a top-down view. You have a circle under the turret that's in the center, and then you will get stasis crystals basically in like the top right, bottom right, top left, bottom left kind of quadrant, so it won't be blocking your view normally, but they're just kind of there. They give you cover, and you can also use them for different things, which we'll talk about. Underneath, there's what's called a Stasis Storm, or the Bleak Domain, which is the exotic perk for this, and that will slow enemies that go into it, but it will also be giving you little ice buddies, which are called icicles in the game. You can get 5 stacks of these, and then you can discharge them up to 5 times per second, and they stack up once per second. So you can use them a lot faster than you can get them. But they do a decent little bit of damage, and every time they hit an enemy, they apply 50 slow, which is half of what you need to freeze a target. On top of your Bleak Watcher, you can freeze enemies pretty quickly here, so that's great. There's a lot there, but it's a fantastic exotic. It's one of the coolest ones I think they've come up with in a long time. One last thing to note, the 4 stasis crystals that show up when the turret spawns will respawn after 15 seconds, and the turret's lasting 25 seconds normally, or 30 seconds with Whisper of Durance. Make sure you keep an eye out for those. Those will help you use a few things. So why is this good? Well, before I talk about that, let me talk about Frost Armor. So first, Frost Armor was buffed just this episode to give 6.25% damage reduction per stack. The normal cap of stacks is 5 stacks, which will give you 31.25% damage reduction, and it has a 9-second timer where you lose all stacks when it expires. Now, with the Stasis Fragment Whisper of Rime, the cap goes up to 8 stacks for 50% damage reduction, and it makes those stacks last 13 seconds, which is substantial and gives you a lot better uptime. It is the highest damage reduction from a verb in the game. And it's one of the best features of Stasis. If you're doing a Stasis build, I absolutely recommend you find some way to build into Frost Armor. So the other thing that really sets this exotic apart though, is last episode they added a new weapon perk called Rime-stealer. And Rime-stealer will give you 1 stack of Frost Armor when you use a weapon to shatter a crystal or frozen enemy. But when you enhance it, it does 2 stacks of Frost Armor per shatter. So if you have 4 crystals or frozen enemies, you get max Frost Armor. Now what does our Bleak Watcher turret now give us? 4 crystals that respawn after 15 seconds, and that's phenomenal. The other thing too, which I will get to later in the fragments, is we are using a fragment called Whisper of Shards, which gives us plus 500% base grenade regen speed every time we shatter a stasis crystal. So between those two things, that's the build. We're getting Frost Armor, and we are getting grenade regen constantly. And that Rime-coat Raiments perk is giving us those crystals consistently. So it's a very solid loop, and it's great. One of the best things about this is because we're getting Frost Armor consistently from Rime-stealer, we don't need the aspect Glacial Harvest, which is usually kind of a given on Stasis builds, these harvest aspects, because they're the only way to make Stasis shards, which are the normal only way to get Frost Armor. But this lets you skip that, and it frees you up so you can use other things. Now, as I mentioned before, you need to be really careful with your crystals. You don't want to put them too much to the enemy. They do okay damage, but you're using them mechanically, so you want to make sure they're in a good spot and you can use them when you want to. The other thing too is watch out for your allies. Maybe communicate with them if you know who they are. Another thing is explosive weapons will not trigger on multiple crystals at once. So like we have a special grenade launcher that does have Rime-stealer, but it's honestly not very good. And because you're having to spend shots to break these crystals, I generally don't recommend looking for special weapons with Rime-stealer at all, because it's just not synergistic. You're going to be using up your special ammo on inanimate objects instead of enemies that you're trying to destroy. So that's a lot of information. There's actually another bit though I want to talk about here, and it's that there's actually 2 kinds of shatters. I only realized this recently despite doing a lot of Stasis videos last episode, but there are 2 kinds of shatters. One is crystal shatters. Those do 175 base damage, and those are from crystals like Glacier Grenades, Headstone, or other perks, including our Rime-coat Raiments crystals that are formed around the turret. The other kind is shatters from freezing enemies. So you freeze an enemy, you shoot them, they shatter, and that base damage is 400. Now, just as a reference point, an ignition or a bolt charge discharge is 750 damage. So the shatter from a frozen enemy is a little over half of the damage of an ignition, but it's really easy to inflict on a lot of enemies and it chains pretty well. Whereas crystal shatters are about 23.3% of an ignition. Another thing on free shatters is that bosses will auto shatter. So if you freeze them, they'll automatically shatter after a period. They don't actually freeze in place, so that's how it does damage to them. But if you shoot them, you can shatter them faster, so you can re-inflict freeze because you can't freeze them while they're already frozen. Another thing I want to add on here is the fragment Whisper of Fissures. I don't use this in this build, but it does come up when talking about shatters a bit. Last episode, both shatter types had their damage boosted, but Whisper of Fissures has remained static. This does 25 base damage, which is not a lot, and it's a separate damage instance that is just classified as generic stasis ability damage. It's not grenade or weapon damage like Headstone would be weapon damage or Glacier Nades would be grenade. Proportionally, for frozen enemy shatters, is only 6.25% damage boost for each shatter, which I generally don't think is worth using. But if you're doing a lot of crystal shatters, it is a 14.3% damage boost on those. Generally, I would say it's good on heavy crystal shattering builds. If you're using Glacial Quake, for instance, on a Titan, go for it. It's free extra damage and it is all over the place. So that's kind of the use case for this. It's not useful in this build though, because we are focused on the freezing shatters and we're using our crystals for utility. So let's talk about our aspects and abilities. First, we have to take Bleak Watcher. This is how we create our stasis turrets. You hold and charge the grenade and then throw it out, and it will create a turret instead of throwing the normal grenade effect. This turret will periodically shoot out 5 seeking projectiles, and each of those will inflict 20 slow, so if all 5 hit, that is an instant freeze, which is great. Now, one thing to note about this aspect is that it will lock your grenade's cooldown to that of the Glacial Grenade, which has a 120 second base cooldown and a 62.5% flat gain factor. You can't change this at all in Stasis. There's actually a little bit of weird stuff you can do on Prismatic, and I have a video on that if you're interested, but that is your base cooldown. Now, just for reference, I haven't done this before, but if you have tier 10 Discipline, that's going to half your cooldown to 60.5 seconds, which is not too bad, but with Whisper of Shards, which we are hoping to have up pretty much consistently, plus tier 10 Discipline, we can get that cooldown down to 17.3 seconds, which is really solid. Our second aspect will be Iceflare Bolts, as I mentioned earlier. And this is really just for more freeze. So when you shatter a frozen enemy, which we're trying to do a lot, it creates a seeker that will target the nearest enemy and freeze them too. If you create 7 of these, it's going to incur an 8-second cooldown, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not too bad. And you're getting pretty consistent freeze. So this is just free extra freezing. So you get more crowd control, more of those really strong free shatters, and just it really makes the build go smooth. I don't list it here, but for our super, we have Winter's Wrath. It's an okay add clear super. It's a roaming super, so it'll charge up fast, but it's not too strong. But it is really helpful at some points if you need to clear out a bunch of enemies, or you just need the survivability of a roaming super, because they give you 90% damage reduction. Our melee is Penumbral Blast. It's fine. It's an extra source of freeze if you just need to control an enemy in a pinch, and it has an 80% flat gain factor. I absolutely recommend Healing Rift for the healing. It's our only source of healing outside of orbs in this build, and that will have a 50% flat gain factor, which is pretty unfortunate. Let's talk about our fragments. We've talked about a lot of these already, but I still want to go through them and just explain what we're doing here. So first off is Whisper of Rime. This gives us more frost armor that lasts longer. This is what takes it up to 8 stacks. And a total damage reduction of 50%. And then the other one that we really need to keep this build going consistently is Whisper of Rending. That makes it much easier to shatter crystals. It will double the damage we deal to crystals, and it will let us do 50% increased damage against frozen enemies, so they are also easier to shatter. Our last 2 fragments are just purely for grenade energy, and first is Whisper of Shards, which I've mentioned a couple times now, but it gives plus 500% base grenade regen speed for 6 seconds, and that can stack up to 11 seconds. So keep in mind that timer, just because your crystals on your Bleak Watcher will only respawn after 15 seconds, so you need to space out how you shoot them. You don't want to just shoot all 4 of them rapid fire. You want to space it out, and also because the frost armor cooldown is 13 seconds, you want to make sure you're lasting to that 15 seconds. Be really conscious of those timers, because a lot of the build is just kind of managing that and making sure you're moving from Bleak Watcher to Bleak Watcher so that you can keep your frost armor up and keep that grenade regen buff up. Lastly, I take Whisper of Torment. This will give you flat grenade energy whenever you receive damage, and it will increase when you have frost armor active. So you get 12% before flat gain factors when you take damage, as long as frost armor is active. Now there's a 1-second cooldown between grenade energy gains, but that's still pretty consistent. And with frost armor, we could take a good bit of damage without really feeling it, so that's a really great combo. This will just bring that grenade uptime to a really high level, so you can just put several turrets out. Now, if you feel like you don't need any more uptime, or you feel like Shards is doing enough for you, there are some alternates. So first, Whisper of Durance is going to make your stasis turret last 5 seconds longer. It takes it from 25 seconds to 30 seconds. And that can be really helpful for having even more out there, or having them last longer so you don't have to micromanage them. On the other side too, you can take Whisper of Bonds, which will create an orb of power when you kill frozen enemies with a 10-second cooldown. And that's just helpful because orbs are one of our sources of healing, and that just gives you another one of those beyond just the stasis weapon kills. And then lastly, if you're feeling like your Rift uptime is not high enough, you can take Whisper of Refraction. This gives you flat class ability energy when you kill any stasis debuffed enemies. That can be really helpful, but because that 50% flat gain factor on Rifts, these numbers are not a lot. You're getting about 4.5% for common enemies, which is just not great. But you have some options here. Definitely tune it how you want, try out different things. Moving over to our mods and armor stats. pretty straightforward setup here. We're trying to make orbs and super energy as much as we can, and then we are going to focus on stasis weapon damage, and then lastly just focus on ability regen. So because we're using stasis, which does not kill very well on the grenadier melee, we're going to focus on orbs. We have a harmonic siphon mod on the helmet, and then we have a reaper mod on the class item. Fortunately, our grenades and melees don't kill very well, so we can't rely on orbs from those, but that's pretty much all we've got. But we're not really using our super too much, so that's okay. Now, we're going to take 2 stasis weapon surges because we need recuperation for our healing on orbs on our legs, and then we need a time dilation on our class item to make sure that those stasis weapon surges last longer. Beyond that, we just generally want some general ability regen. We are, beyond that, as always, on the chest, we like damage resistance. We don't need much else here. And on the helmet, I've just included some heavy ammo finder and scout so we can help our team out a little bit and just make sure we're topped out on heavy for those harder targets. For stats, you absolutely want to max out resilience and discipline, then get as much recovery as you can for rift uptime and healing, and then just whatever strength is left over and just get intellect to 30. Though even that's probably optional in this build. Weapons. This is a big focus of this build because of the emphasis on Frost Armor and Rime-stealer, so as you can imagine, our goal is getting Frost Armor uptime from our weapon, and then having damage with unlimited ammo. Because once again, we don't want to be wasting limited ammo on utility like Rime-stealer. So we're looking for a primary weapon that can have Enhanced Rimestealer, which is fortunately all of them because all weapons that have launched since last episode are enhanceable. You can also pair Rime-stealer with Headstone, which has really great synergy. You will generate a crystal on precision kills, and shooting that will give you Frost Armor. But we do have a pretty solid source of these stasis crystals with our exotics, so we don't necessarily need that, but it is an option just to have a little bit more uptime or kind of help save your loop if it goes wrong. Weapons I recommend, we have 2 from episode Revenant, Exuvii, which is a stasis hand cannon that can roll with Rime-stealer, and then I usually pair it with either Headstone or Frenzy. Frenzy helps out that reload speed and gives you a little bit of a damage boost. Lately I've been using Red Tape, which is a scout rifle, and that can roll Rime-stealer with either Headstone or Explosive Payload, which are both great options here. I'm using a Headstone roll in the gameplay in this video. There's also Fair Judgment, which is a stasis auto rifle that you can get from the Ritual kiosk. It was the Ritual weapon last episode, so you can just get it for free. You can get it for a few resources at a kiosk, and it has fixed perks, and it has Rime-stealer and either Headstone or Onslaught in the 4th column, and both those are both very solid options. One last weapon is the competitive weapon for this episode, Redrix's Estoc, and that can roll with Rime-stealer and Headstone. There's not a lot of other great options there, but it's a very strong weapon and very good for that if you're lucky enough to get that combo. In your energy slot, this is where you want to use a special ammo weapon. We need a primary in our kinetic darkness slot, so we want to use some with special ammo here. You can use some like Psychopomp or VS Velocity Baton just to get some AoE damage. And Psychopomp will give you Bolt Charge, which you will discharge constantly with the Stasis turret. Fusion rifles and shotguns are really good for stronger targets. Tessellation is a good exotic option. This will actually be a stasis weapon in your energy slot, which is really cool. And it has built-in Demolitionist, so it will give you 20% grenade energy before flat gain factors on every kill, which is really great. But one thing I would definitely mention is that if you have Icebreaker, which is the exotic from Vesper's Host, this is really good because it will give you ignitions whenever you shoot a frozen enemy. So that is really solid AoE damage, and it also will recharge ammo as you score kills on enemies. So that's really good, especially paired with this if you have it, but if you don't, you have lots of great options here. Lastly, on the heavy weapon side, you just want a good strong stasis heavy. I like VS Chill Inhibitor from Vesper's Host. You can get the God Roll that from Banshee still if you've completed it at least once. That is the Envious Arsenal bait and switch roll. For a rocket launcher, the current best is Cold Comfort from Ghosts of the Deep. And then for linear fusions, your best option that is easily available right now is Spectrum 4FR, which is a world drop. It has some pretty good combos on it, and once again, it's a world drop. Not very easily farmable, but you can get some good stuff, so just keep a lookout for that. Now, one last thing I want to mention is that in about a month, we are getting a dungeon refresh activity called Rite of the Nine that will refresh Prophecy, Ghost of the Deep, and Spire of the Watcher. Prophecy has a really solid stasis hand cannon called Judgment, and Ghost of the Deep has Cold Comfort, and also a Waveframe stasis grenade launcher. So that's a lot of good weapons that might get refreshed with new perks, including Rime-stealer. So keep an eye out for those, and might have some really cool options to play around with for this kind of build. Now, I just want to show you some gameplay. This is just from a normal Nightfall this week. There's like shadows, but I just want to kind of show you how it plays with teammates and in little bit different activities. So you can see here we've set up our turret and we're just sitting under it so that we get those ice buddies or icicles. And we're freezing enemies, then shattering them so that the Iceflare Bolts can carry the freeze to more enemies. You generally want to stay near your turret until you are close to regenerating the next grenade and then keep moving. I actually ended up with one of the crystals on the little escort ship there, which is fun. But yeah, take care of any enemies that are immediately in your way and then just shatter those crystals soon. If you can shatter the crystals as you're coming up on your turret, then you can do that too, but just keep an eye on that timer. 13 seconds is decently generous. You can see we're throwing out another one here. One thing to note about the stasis buddies or the icicles is if they score kills, they will not count as your kills, and it's generic ability damage. It does not count as anything. So that's one reason I don't really like using builds where you have to rely on kills to keep your grenade loop going, or things like Devour, is because that ice buddy will actually fight you on that and it doesn't feel very synergistic. See here, we're just kind of methodically working through the starting area here, and then just every so often using Icebreaker to shatter those frozen enemies and get the ignition off too. As you move forward, you can always just shoot back at your crystals if they're still there. I'm not a very good sniper, but frozen enemies make really easy targets, so that's really good for me. Now, jumping forward to the boss fight of this Nightfall. See here, we're settling down into the room. We got to clear out these ads first. Icebreaker remains still very strong just for clearing those enemies. And see, we're just popping all our crystals to make sure our frost armor stacks are up enough. And they've respawned here. Boss is spawning too. We put out our healing rift, and then we're going to throw out a second turret and just start working on the boss. So they're going to be consistently frozen, and so we just want to keep dealing some kind of damage to shatter them. Our teammate is Behemoth and was wailing on him a little bit, though not done as much as they could have. Blowing this boss down pretty good. Our teammates are doing okay. And we're just shattering everything we can here, and our frost armor is very easy to top off because of that. And then we're doing some bait and switch swaps with our grenade launcher to just finish off this boss. And that's pretty much it. As you can see in the gameplay, generally what I do is I place the Bleak Domain and Watcher between you and enemies with some natural cover. Pick a good area. You're going to be shooting the stasis crystals, so you can't use them as cover for too long. And then shoot the crystals as you approach to stack up frost armor. Stand in that Bleak Domain so you get the ice buddies, and prioritize your frozen enemies, because when you shatter them, Iceflare Bolts will work, but if teammates shatter them, it doesn't count. And then if you have stronger targets, you want to prioritize shooting them too so that you can freeze them, and that will make your life a little bit easier. Generally place your healing rift in the domain for sustain. It's a really good setup because it makes it easier to stay there longer, and stacked with the damage resistance, it will keep you alive pretty well. Use your special weapons for heavier targets, and then reshoot the crystals when they respawn, and then just place the next Bleak Domain and Watcher and just keep moving. In boss encounters, you just really want to place those turrets pretty much on cooldown because you want as much damage going to the boss as possible, and you want kind of some options and more crystals to use. And then lastly, you can just use your super for ad clear or survivability. In those gameplay clips, I didn't really show it, but earlier in that Nightfall, I just kind of used it to clear out some enemies and to just kind of keep mobile, because sometimes you have like a few spread out clusters of enemies where this build doesn't quite work as well, and that's where your super can actually do pretty well. And with that, that's pretty much it for the build. Hopefully that's been helpful. As I wrap up, I'm just going to slide back to that build review tab. As I mentioned earlier, I like the stasis version of this better, but the prismatic version is good too. I will actually link my prismatic Rime-coat build at the end of this video if you want to check that out. It's from last episode, but it's still very viable. Just don't worry about the artifact. With that, I hope you've enjoyed the build. As always, I will have a Mobalytics link and a dim link in the description. I will have a link to all these slides if you need to refer to any of this information quickly. All the technical information comes from the Destiny data compendium, so definitely check that out if you haven't, because it's very useful and helps you make better builds. We are kind of coming into a lull of the season. I will try to keep up builds. I still have a lot of good ideas, but I probably won't be making quite as many just so I can not get burnt out too much. If you ever want to talk about builds, feel free to comment down below or join my Discord, which I will also link in the description. I like to talk about builds all the time, and as I come up with ideas, I usually share them. And with that, I really thank you for watching and hope you have a good one.